Well, hi, everyone. I'm Peggy Winton, president of AIM. That's the practice known as Intelligent Information Management. In fact, AIM stands for the Association for Intelligent Information Management. We are 150,000 people strong, comprised of folks who understand and believe that their organization's information is their most important, it's their most valuable asset. And with that comes responsibility and reward. We operate as a member-based association with year-round activities, events, and resources. So check us out at aim.org. That's two I's in AIM. I'm going to share some data points that come from our peer-to-peer and our member-to-member conversations and research that we regularly conduct. In fact, we make the resulting reports freely available. So again, please take advantage of that. The AIM community has long made the connection between the crazy growing volume and variety and velocity of the information that's swirling around their organization. I know you feel that too. And the compliance or legal risk that carries. But now there's such an increasing customer demand for value and availability and quality when it comes to the products and services that we make available. And I think we can all say that that's those drivers and demands have been put on steroids over the last 12 months. So we're seeing a noticeable shift now in the perceived role of information governance within those organizations. I like to say that for digital transformation leaders, something bigger is definitely at play right now. And that is a recognition that the stewards of information really need to up their game and really need to move up the value chain in the way that they talk about information governance. They are making a stronger connection now between information governance and business strategy. I can't think of anyone better equipped to talk to me today about this shift than Rob Gerbrandt. Rob is Managing Director for Information Governance Consulting at Iron Mountain. Welcome to you, Rob.
Thanks, Peggy, for having me today, and really pleased to have this opportunity to chat with you.
Well, I'm so glad you're here, and I'm super excited to hear about this new offering that you're heading up, an advisory services offering from Iron Mountain. Tell me more about that.
You know, we are the classic box people. Everyone knows Iron Mountain as being that box person or that shredder. But, you know, over the years, as you rightly described, organizations are starting to change the amount and types of information that they deal with. All of a sudden, you know, we're dealing with structured information, unstructured information, backup tapes, physical information, all of these pieces that have to come together. So about 4 or 5 years ago, Iron Mountain started really thinking about the future around how do we change what we're doing for our clients. We got into data centers, we got into the IT asset disposition activities, but we also really got into the business of information governance to support organizations as they reimagine the risk and value equation about the entire information layer or information body that they have across their organizations.
Are you seeing any particular driver or trend over the last few months? I think we can say the pandemic has certainly accelerated certain things, but what are your customers talking to you about mostly?
The pandemic really changed how things are going across and how organizations are thinking about accessing and managing their information. All of a sudden, with the remote workforces and the work from home, organizations had to figure out, how do we deal with that? How do we get what used to be an easy file that somebody had in a filing cabinet, for example, and get it to their employees for it to be used in their business process? So all of a sudden, there was rapid scanning and digitization exercises created on the fly to respond to that, but not a lot of real thinking that was going on in terms of that knee jerk, let's just do it so we know, so we can get it done. But then we sort of saw, as the pandemic extended out, we just had the year celebration or recognition yesterday, and organizations are now starting to say, okay, how do we actually get our arms around this information? Because we created all kinds of extra information. And how do we sort of start thinking about mitigating the risk and improving the quality? Because, as we know, a lot of organizations have actually made a firm stand to say the future of their work is going to be remote.
You're so right. I think a phrase that we've been hearing a lot is mopping up, meaning, the speed with which organizations enabled a remote workforce is just astounding. There were winners and losers when it comes to the cloud-based collaboration platforms, as just an example, and what was just good enough. And you're so right. Now organizations are going, maybe we need to reel that back just a little bit and do it right the first time. I think you're absolutely spot on there, Rob. But let's talk about the elephant in the room here. Still a really sobering statistic among the AIM community members is that easily half of them believe that their executives run in the other direction at the mere mention of the word governance, even amid the recognition of impending and increasing regulations when it comes to personal data privacy and protection, for example, even amid the drivers you just talked about around a work from home environment. They think of it as a cost of doing business and a real downer versus a pathway to their organizational mission. And I have to say, I agree with that thinking because of the way that it's typically been presented and typically been sold. So as you're rolling out this new service, who are the folks that you're talking to within these organizations? What's their functional role? Who's getting it?
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. A lot of organizations, and the insurance industry, quite frankly, has been brilliant in this because, think back a few years ago when cyber risk became the de facto, word of the day. I'd love to have been that insurance underwriter that had that first thought to say, let's create a policy. Let's create an insurance policy and sell a policy against cyber risk. So, within that frame, it became relatively easy for organizations to compartmentalize elements of information governance and insure against it. The challenge that organizations have today, though, and it really comes down to the total volume of that information, and what do they do with it today, and how do they sort of manage it going forward? It wasn't that long ago when we started talking about the risk of information and how to improve the use of information, that organizations had that sort of easy balance to say, well, let's see, I can just do a calculation of storage cost, and compare it perhaps to the e-discovery legal review costs. And it became really clear what the option was, rather than doing the discovery, clean up your mess, because storage was still reasonably good. But today's storage is pennies. It's fractions of pennies. So there's really no incentive for an organization from a storage side of the house to decrease the volume of the information. So what they end up doing is just building that same volume of information and moving it from one location to another location to another location. I frequently, revisit those times when I was with a client, with an employer, and we did the migration from Lotus Notes to Exchange. And then we migrated to, the next generation platform and the next generation platform. But every time, instead of cleaning up the content in those email folders and email environments, we just moved them from one to another to another to another. So we ended up really focusing in on just preserving the rot, redundant, outdated, and trivial. And that's probably the politest abbreviation that we can use for the volume of what's found in those file shares and those email PSTs and those email server folders, where everybody just becomes it's a dumping ground for information. And we know from our experience in the e-discovery realm, whether it's the Zubulake or the Morgan Stanley early findings and early cases that really set the framework for e-discovery, that there is a smoking gun everywhere. And how do you prevent that smoking gun from becoming a huge risk for you? So for us, as we've gone through it, we look at it through that classic governance, risk, and compliance lens to really tie together those themes. Most of the time, of course, we end up we have our starting conversations and our starting relationships with a records manager, and they are a very discrete entity within most organizations, and they just don't have the right orientation or the right level in many organizations to really be a strategic influencer. So we end up moving up the chain to ideally chief risk officers or chief compliance officers or general counsels to really be able to have that conversation about a risk orientation. And it's a risk orientation that needs to have the full risk view. So it could be operational risk, it could be financial risk, it could be legal risk, it could be reputational risk. Because what CEO or CFO wants to have their face and name on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the Toronto Globe and Mail on this side of the border, everywhere sort of creates that reputational risk issue.
But Rob, what do you think has changed? Because through the years, either an organization funds their own risk. They just say, what the heck? We'll deal with it if it comes. And I think executives have always played the negative lottery, if you will. So what has changed recently in that? I get it. I get that you talk to risk folks because that's their business and they care, and the records managers certainly care too. But what are you seeing that it takes to truly get buy-in from key stakeholders, and not just executives, but the line of business owners who are pushing so much innovation?
Well, exactly. And it comes down to really the opportunity connecting it to the digital transformation initiatives.
Okay.
Because if we think about the classic realm of digital transformation, whether it's moving to the cloud or moving from Microsoft Office to Google Suite or improving the user experience activity, in many cases, again, and I go back to that mail transition perspective, we're just moving current content forward. We're not doing anything to improve the value or the usability of that content. So part of the challenge that we're starting to see is that people are stumbling with their digital transformations. They're not getting the real value out of that as much as possible. And to do that, we encourage them to think about the effect of the information layer upon that transition and upon that transformation. because, as I said, if you're just going to bring the same black hole content forward, you're not going to be able to enable the right business processes. You're not going to get the same desired efficiencies that you're seeking to get. And ultimately, of course, there is that cultural dimension as well. Right? I often say, that a really good IG program has sits on a three-legged stool, where one leg is all about the right policies or governance, and everybody's got the policies. Another leg is the technology leg itself, and everybody's got, whether it's SharePoint or network file shares or something to sort of capture content. But the third leg, and it's the one that sadly is the shortest, the weakest across the board, it's the cultural leg. It's all about change management. It's all about getting the buy-in of the organization, so that they understand the true value of it. Hopefully, if we can really get people thinking about the change management perspective, we won't have those instances where we show up for work on a Monday morning and there's a new icon on our desktop. And what are we supposed to do with that?
Well, it's just like training. That's probably an area that gets the least amount of resources or attention. I think you're right. When we ask our community members about effectiveness when it comes to getting key stakeholder attention and the role of information governance in that, knowing its history as sort of a Debbie Downer, they do think that the time has come to talk about it more obliquely. And instead to really lead with those business objectives. I mean, that's what gets an executive excited, is to really remind everyone about the mission and then sort of take steps back from there. I think we've made some real breakthroughs in changing conversations among our information governance and records management practitioners to stop talking about how the information governance sausage is made and instead talk about just what you say, Rob, the extraction of value. Let me ask you, along those lines, you talked about rot, just hanging on to stuff regularly. I mean, let's face it, who loves to clean out their closet? For that analogy, show me a closet that still has suits from 20 years ago, and I'll show you a crazy email box or just crazy stores all over the place.
Exactly.
Someone very smart said that when you think about GDPR, for example, and other regulations, that has caused a lot of organizations to actually avoid keeping certainly personal customer information just out of fear. But that could also be a missed opportunity. And so how do you all counsel people to say, wait a minute, information is an enabler as well. There are so many nuggets of value in there that it's not a question of either hanging on to everything or, heaven forbid, don't let it come in here because we're afraid of handling it correctly. So how do you all counsel that and find that good line?
And we do that deliberately. It's that two sides of the coin perspective. One side is risk and one side is value. Because in every situation, as we're working with clients, it's to understand and unpack those potential value opportunities. Right? It's all about understanding the impact to the business process. It's all about tying together those thoughts around, if we had an enabled workflow process where information, as it starts to form, is automatically assuming and getting the attributes built into it through the workflow and through the system, then you're creating value from day one. Right? It becomes that message of, how do you get the highest value out of your processes? How do you connect those pieces? And of course, how do you sort of get rid of it all? Part of the challenge that we've always sort of encountered, it comes back to, well, what is information governance, right? Because, for a lot of organizations, there's 6 people in a room, so you got 7 or 8 different definitions of it, and that's the challenge, right? And it very much depends on which hat you're wearing. If you're in the chief data officer's world, you're not thinking about information governance, but you're thinking about data governance. And in reality, they're 2 flavors of the same apple, right? So how do you sort of break that down, and how do you create the commonality bridges between those communities where there's some softer form of value that's also created as a result of that?
I think what you're really talking about is also having the expertise to learn how to operationalize your information. And clearly that's something that you all are hoping to bring to the table in all of this. So I should ask, you mentioned it yourself, Iron Mountain, oh my gosh, enjoys an enviable clientele and enviable tenure, these 70 plus years in business. How do you get your existing customers or folks who certainly know your name to stop thinking of you as just shred and store? How have you been able to get them to think of you differently?
We've made some deliberate steps forward in terms of using opportunities such as this to get that message across to the community, and connecting different forums around the value opportunities. One of the things that we've got, and one of the really interesting areas that we've stepped into as part of that growth and connecting, is maturity assessments. So we've got a solution set called IG Health Rate that really is an opportunity for a client to compare themselves against 10 competencies of IG, against a peer group, to be able to say, where do they sit today? And how can they use that as a baseline to go forward from there? And so ultimately, it's been sort of rethinking, how do we represent the business of information governance? Because classically, again, it's been that records retention schedule. And how do we sort of upskill the community? How do we change the conversation and the dialogue around information governance so that people are starting to feel more at home there?
Are you seeing increased concern and maybe even recognition of the need to reconcile and consolidate in cases of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, where you think you've got problems with one organization, try combining
connecting those dots
two.
together.
Yeah.
No, and thank you for that. That's another area that we've been focusing on of late. Now, our classic experience and our classic sort of go-to when in the business of mergers and acquisitions goes back to the boxes, and literally just moving boxes from one account to another account as part of the post-closure transaction. But as we look at what's happening in the business of M&As, as early as due diligence, there's lots of opportunities to understand that information layer, to really be able to identify what type of risk is there. Is there hidden personally identifiable information, or personal health information, or other types of IP that's out in the wild in a network that could create risk? Is there hidden cyber risk in an environment that may poke its head out after the fact? You look at the acquisition of Starwood Group by the Marriott Group. Right? There was a hack of the Starwood Group a couple years before that acquisition went through, but after, in 2018, when that hack actually came to life, and the Marriott Group ended up having about a 6% drop in their stake in their share value at that time, as well as having to deal with the fines and penalties that were attributable to that hack itself, if they had only known about that beforehand, they would have been able to, if not prevent it, at least be prepared for it. So that's the essence for it, is preparation. It's foresight. It's being able to understand the landscape ahead of us.
So explain more about the service offering, the advisor services, the exciting new arm. What you described to me previously, and just listening to you right now, it's almost like having on-demand experts for these things rather than trying to skill up or heaven forbid, expect that people doing their day jobs or being responsible for a business process would be able to do this. They don't know how to do it. They don't want to do it. How is that going to work? I think sometimes executives shy away from the concept of professional services or consulting as this big black box, sort of ka-ching, ka-ching, a never-ending engagement. So without giving away too much, how are you all going to approach this so that expectations are set and you agree on deliverables in a tidy little package?
Well, I mean, that's the joy of very much having a startup approach, effectively. You know, we come from, most of my team comes from the Big Four experience. So we've got that solid background. We know the opportunity and the challenges. But because we're sort of in that startup mode, we're parsing and chunking these pieces down very deliberately and very discreetly. You know, so we'll build with a client an incremental roadmap of a series of building blocks where we're just going to scope the first set of them. And it's up to the client after that point in time, you know, to really look at it and say, are they at that stage to move forward from there? Are they able to exercise forward from there? So our model is really, you know, start building, start rolling out, and proving the value in those incremental little pieces, as opposed to the classic big models.
Certainly sounds like there's legs there. So I wish you the very best of luck. And it's been a lot of fun talking to you today, Rob. I really appreciate it. I should give you the last word. So before we let people go and ring off, what one piece of advice would you like to leave people with? And how do they continue the conversation with you? How do they get in touch with you?
You know, getting in touch with us is really straightforward. ironmountain.com. There's an advisory service line off the front page. Contact information is there directly as well. But you know, the really key for a lot of us, as in a passing thought, is be prepared and open to explore the opportunities as we build up from that narrow view of records management, of data governance, to really creating that conversation, which is a strategic organizational imperative, and change the conversation from there. That's the first step.
And opportunity is the operative word. So that's great. You're welcome in the AIM community anytime, Rob. So thanks. And thanks everyone for listening. Let's do it again sometime. See you later.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Rob.